おはようございました。私はJongwon Kim、韓国の選挙師です。And this is all I know in Japanese. Yes. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jongwon. As I introduced, I'm working with the WEC International here in Metro Manila, doing the mission mobilization. And this morning, I'd like to share just a brief history about Japanese, the church, the Christianity in Japan. And also, what I prepared is also in doing so, I wanted to present why is the landing and growing the church and Christianity appeared so different between Korea and Japan, even though it has many commonalities between two countries in terms of the culture and historical backgrounds and many different areas. But probably the time pressure, I'm not sure whether we're going to manage the whole, but at least I'm going to present the history of the Christianity in Japan. Before we start, I'd like to start with share the interesting facts about Japan. And I know all the Filipinos love singing. You know what? The term karaoke, it means empty orchestra in Japanese. Okay? And there is about 1,500 earthquakes every year in Japan. Okay? And since 1949, you know, that Japan has produced 19 winners of a Nobel Prize. And another interesting fact is, if you're a fan of ice cream, you might want to try eel-flavored ice cream. And there is such a thing in Japan. Okay, I haven't tried myself. I'm an ice cream lover, but I want to try when I go there. Okay. And there's actually a common thing in Korea and Japan, many, but the one particular thing is there is actually cat cafe in Korea and Japan, that you can go and enjoy cafe as well as the tens of the cats, and you can hang out with those cats in the cafe together. Okay. And another common factor between Korea and Japan is Korea and Japan are the country of which the 4 modern countries were never colonized by Europe. Okay? Korea is actually been colonized by Japan, which is not European country. Okay? All right. So the first Japanese encounter of Christianity goes back in the 6th century with the Nestorian they landed there, but their landing was so brief and they actually retreated soon after, so actually didn't carry any meaningful context encounter. But actually the meaningful encounter took place again in the 16th century, though, when the Saint Francis Xavier landed to Japan. So 1549, he came to Japan as Catholic missionary. He was actually Jesuit. They belonged to the Society of Jesus. And actually he had traveled quite a bit long distance before he came to Japan. He started his journey from his home country, Portugal and Spain, and then went to Mozambique in Africa first, and then went to India and spent a couple of years there, planting churches as a missionary, and was quite successful. And then he went to Malacca in Malaysia, and then went back to India, then went again to Molucca in Indonesia. And then eventually after that, in Malacca, when he was in Malacca, he came to know one Japanese called Anjiro or Yajiro. He actually was a fugitive. He had committed a murder, so he fled the country, and he somehow ended up coming to Malacca in Malaysia. And then he found this interesting foreign missionary, and he approached to him, and then they become friends, and Yanjiro shared about his own country, Japan, and then Xavier found this interested, so he actually decided to go to Japan together with Yajiro. So that's how it came in 1549. That was the first land of the Catholic missionary to Japan, and that was the beginning of Christianity of the country. As you see, this map is how the country was divided by different the shogun, the lord in that time. And this is the area, the Kyushu area, the region where the Francis Xavier and also other missionaries were mostly acted very vivally there. Okay, so this is the Kyushu region. 6 years before Xavier came to Japan, there was one Portuguese merchant ship was kind of blown off and then forced to land that small island in Kyushu. And that was a first kind of the foreign landing. But then 6 years later, in Kagoshima, the Xavier came. And then, initially Kagoshima, there was an initial welcoming, but soon after, the Lord, the daimyo of that region, kind of rejected and banned the Christianity. So he decided to leave Kagoshima and went to the Hirao. So he started the mission work there, and then he made some converts, about 100 people there. And then he realized that he wanted to reach to the very top of the hierarchy. So he decided to go to journey to Kyoto, where the emperor was present. But then when he went there, Kyoto, he realized the emperor was powerless. He didn't have any power, but the shogun that has much power, but also because of they've been suffering from long years of civil war, the country basically was devastated, and he disappointed. He couldn't actually complete what he wanted. So he decided to come back where he started his journey in Kyushu area. So he ended up coming to this area, Bungo, where he also met the Lord of the region, who became very favorable to Christianity, and later himself become a convert. Okay, so the whole Kyushu region has become the hotspot for the lowly conversion. So the Xavier and the missionaries could make some converts of the lords. That means the ruler of the areas. It's mainly because these Japanese lords were interested what the Portuguese and Spanish can bring, mainly the gunpowder and guns, because they've been fighting these civil wars, and when they realized this foreign people has the very powerful weapons, they wanted to show their favor to win, to make this treaty with these people and trade, so that they can have actually advantage of this gun power in their world. And the first Lord converted was Omura Sumitada. So as the Lord, he becomes the first convert. And he's the one who opened the Nagasaki port to the foreign and Spanish and Portuguese merchant, so that Nagasaki at that point was just a small, tiny fish village. But it has become, since then, a very center of the trade. And the Xavier also met Otomo Sorin. He was the ruler of the Bungo region. And initially he was very friendly to Xavier, not because of he was genuinely interested in the Christianity, but as I shared earlier, he was also interested in the goods and the weapons that these Portuguese people carry. But he made such a good impact on the early Christianity because he was the one who established the headquarters of the Jesuit mission in their region. And later, he actually sent the two Japanese embassies to Europe, whom actually were able to meet the Pope there and came back, and there was such a good advance in their Christian works. Okay, so this is the area the Otoshorin is from. But in the Shimazu area, they were in the battle. So from the south, the Shimazu family was actually invading the Bungo areas, and this Otomo Sorin was losing the battle. And eventually he asked help from the central, where the Toyotomi Hideyoshi space. So he came and fought on behalf of Sorin and defeated all the Shimazu people from the south. And from then on, that was the beginning of the dawn of the Christian century, the historians call. So from that point of the first landing of Francis Xavier, there were about 100 years of history. There was much growth of Christians, mainly Catholics. But unfortunately, in the middle of that, the Dark Era also came to being. Because the middle of, towards the end of 16th century, the Oda Nobunaga lost his power, and then Toyotomi Hideyoshi becomes daimyo. He couldn't become the shogun because of his the class, but he was very as influential as the shogun. And Toyotomi Hideyoshi was become very suspicious about Christianity, because that time he began to see many his lords, daimyos, becoming Christian converts. And then he was, in that time in the Japanese society and history, the loyalty was the most important the value in the society. But these daimyos who converted to Christianity, they carry their Christian faith, their loyalty to Christ, to their faith, it seems to be greater than their loyalty to him, to the shogun. So that's how the kind of persecution started coming to being, because the Christianity become something that's threatening to their system, to their society. So the Toyotomi Hideyoshi issued an edict to ban the Christianity. And initially he kicked out all the foreign missionaries out. So that's when the Francis Xavier decided to leave Japan, and he did. And in 1596, there was a Spanish ship that wrecked, and before in front of the Shikoku Sea, and then many the crews and pilots were being captured by Japanese soldiers. But when they're captured, the Spanish pilots were kind of threatened the Hideyoshi that unless you treat us well, the Spanish missionary will come with the loyal army of Spanish king. So that was the wrong things for Hideyoshi to hear. So he, of course, was very upset, and he was convinced that Christianity and that those missionaries were the kind of forefront of Spanish army that eventually will come and invade the country. And next he started searching all the Christians, basically to kill. And this is Toyotomi Hideyoshi. So the next year, 1597, he forced 26 people marched about 460 miles distance to Nagasaki, and at the hilltop of the Nagasaki, he crucified them, 26 martyrs. It was very ironic that Toyotomi Hideyoshi chose this type of execution, because it wasn't common practice in Japan, the crucifixion. So he deliberately chose this method to show to the people as an example. But before we go that, by this time, the people say there were about 300,000 Catholic Christians. It was in very rapid growth in Japan of Catholicism, but from this point on, the government started to persecute and oppress the Christians very severely. So, towards the end of the Hideyoshi's time, and also the successor, the Ieyasu regime, they say the Christians were killed about a half of the 300,000 or even more. So the wonderful start of the Christianity in the 16th century, end of the 16th century, it didn't really last long. And there are about almost the 350 years until towards the end of the 19th century, the US came and forced Japan open their ports to the foreign again. The Christians were severely persecuted, and once they exposed the belief, they were killed. So this Catholicism, who landed about 300 before the Protestantism, was almost lost their foundation. There were some hidden Christians, but they were so hidden that nobody knew how many they are and where they are. But there were some small number of people trying to keep their faith and keep their ritual. But other than that, most of the Christians were killed. And then in the history, the shogunate ended, and then the major restoration started, and that was the beginning of their modern time of the Japanese history, when the U.S. came and opened their ports, and so through that time, the first Protestant missionary in 1859 landed to Japan. That was the first Protestant missionary to Japan. And he was actually a medical doctor. So he was mainly doing his medical work as a missionary. He also landed in Nagasaki, where was considered as a center of Christianity for many centuries. But then soon after, he moved to the Yokohama, where the new treaty port was opened. So Yokohama becomes a new port and made the treaty between U.S. and Japan. So he transferred himself to Yokohama and started a clinic there. And later he built the Hepburn School for medical training. So after the Hepburn arrived, some other Protestant missionaries started coming to Japan. So the Protestant mission works started, and from the mid-19 and towards the end of 19, and it was rapid growth again, because the historical and social, the atmosphere was very different from the past. The government itself, the Meiji government, was much more lax about Christianity, and people were also more open towards the foreigners and foreign values and Christian teaching. So in the history that there was many also Christian converts was coming to being, but unfortunately, as becomes coming to the beginning of the 20th century, early 20th century, that the militant government, the Showa period started, this growth really dramatically slowed down. And as we know, from then on, the early 20th century to the end of the Second World War, the Japan becomes a very the militant dominant and oriented nations. They have been invading many countries, including Korea and China and Russia, and eventually they started Second World War II. So through this time, the church also lost the power and the momentum, and the Christians also persecuted and killed, and basically they just lost the grip of Japanese people and hearts. So this is how the Christianity came to the country of Japan and developed. And the Korea also has some similar history. how the Catholicism first came, and then about 100 years later, Protestantism came. But as you know, the Korean church has a very different history, very different things. We know that now in Japan, there is about 0.5 evangelical Christians in Japan, they say. And all together with the Catholic and other form of the Christianity, they say about 1% Christians. Whereas Korea, even though we also started declining, but still we have about 20% of Christians in Korea. And once we reached about 30% of the population, including the Catholic. So why was so different? There's some interesting studies, but unfortunately my time's up. So hopefully in the Q&A session later, I might have some chance to share briefly about why this country is so different in the way the church has grown. Okay? So thank you for listening.